My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to LGBTQ Life. I'm Mick FitzGerald and we're here in a coronavirus-free zone. We're not self-isolating, we're going out to yourselves, and I am delighted to welcome back somebody who, for me, has been central to everything that has been good in the LGBT community for probably the last 10 years or so. So welcome back, Laura Harmon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Laura, just the situation we've got in it, so that to bring people up to speed to your background. You went to UCD. Tell us, what did you get up to down there? And not on the personal level, as we say.
Yeah, so UCC I went to in
Sorry,
Cork,
UCC, I apologise.
And yeah, so it was there really that I became involved in politics and got an interest in politics. So I came out as gay in my early 20s when I was in UCC, joined the LGBT society there, which I'm very grateful for, all the support that they gave me. They still do great work. And then I got involved in student union politics. And I was the LGBT rights officer in UCC, and then I ran for USI, the Union of Students in Ireland, and I was a quality officer there from 2012 to 2014, and I became president of USI in 2014. I was the first woman president of USI in 20 years, and of course that was the year of the marriage referendum. So I would have worked with the student campaign around that. We registered 30,000 young people to vote ahead of that referendum.
You did indeed. Yeah, no, just stepping back slightly, Laura, I mean, am I right in thinking you came through in the generation where now, feminism I can remember from the time I was at UCD, but you were of the generation where, if you like, LGBT was more or less acceptable to a degree, in the sense that there was less stigmatization than there would have been, say, when I was at UCD, where there were very, very few people around in those days. There were no LGBT societies or anything like that. Am I doing you a disservice, or was that the environment you came of age in?
Well, certainly I think things were improved, I'd imagine, since the time, when you were in college, and, there was more support in societies, but still, I guess at the time it was very difficult to come out. I think it's still quite difficult for people to come out.
I think it is, yes, yeah.
Particularly maybe in rural areas, or, sometimes it can just be very difficult for the individual themselves to, come to terms with that. So there is still a lot of stigma, and I mean, we've seen, recent cases, hate crimes, occurring, physical attacks, and I would still feel uncomfortable a lot of the time, with public displays of affection with my girlfriend in public, because you don't know if people are going to look at you in a weird way, or what's going to happen. So it is still difficult. Certainly I think we've come a long way, but I think even though we have marriage equality, even though we have things like gender recognition for the trans community, there's still a lot to do in terms of the law, and hate crime legislation is certainly something I think that we need to put in place.
Sure. Can I ask you, did you have a supportive family, or did you have to somehow or other bring them around to your way of thinking?
No, my family were very supportive. I was very lucky in that regard, and my friends as well. I think it was myself really that I took my time coming to terms with it, I suppose. People deal with things in different ways, but very fortunate that I've had a lot of support, during my life, and I know, that it's not the case for everybody that is the way that things go, but for me I was very fortunate that I had a very supportive family.
Can I ask you again, and I don't want to appear to be too prying on this one, but one of the difficulties I found for a lot of people was what we would call the cultural environment that we grew up in. It might have been easier if you grew up in a more liberal, secular environment, but let's be honest, we grew up in relatively a Catholic environment. On a personal level, was that something you brushed aside, or was that something you had to, as I say, make your way through?
Well, I think, I'm from a rural area originally, Gaelgeóir down in northwest Cork, called Balavorny, so it would have been quite a small community. Everybody knows everyone, and a lot of people would still be religious down there, and obviously that's their own personal choice, but certainly when I went to college really was when I suppose my eyes were opened up, and the fact that I realised, oh God, there are lots of other LGBT people in the world, and you know there is a lot of support out there. So I really do think that I was fortunate enough in the first place to be able to go to college, to be able to have that experience, to be able to meet those people. I know not everyone has that you know, privilege, and I think a lot of people, you know, who aren't in maybe formal education, or you know, they mightn't have access to the same supports. So I do think it is, you know, really valuable, for example, the work that the likes of Belong To are doing around the country with their groups for young people. I mean, that's something that I would have loved to have had when I was a teenager, those kind of youth groups. And I know Tenny do great work as well for the trans community in the same way. And I think we need more funding for those organisations. And there's been loads of research to, you know, to show that LGBT bullying is still a huge problem, you know, in our schools, and something that needs to be tackled. And certainly, you know, a lot of teachers maybe don't know how to deal with that. I know that the INTO, the Irish National Teachers Organisation, their LGBT group, you know, is doing a lot of work around, you know, how teachers can tackle, you know, homophobia in the classroom, and you know, be empowered to do that. Of course, you know, there is still a lot of fear among teachers of coming out, you know, particularly if they're working in schools with a particular religious ethos. You know, the teachers themselves are afraid to come out, so that can still be a problem. We're still dealing with that shadow, you know, from the past.
Yeah. So growing up, were you a gaelgeóir?
Yeah, I'm from a Gaeltacht community. Yeah,
so that's what, yes,
I did my primary and secondary school education through Irish.
So did I.
Don't
I grew up on the north side of Dublin.
Brilliant. I don't get to practice it as much now, but certainly, yeah. I mean, that was a big part, and you know, something I am proud of. You know, that I have that, and you know, I think it's great. We see a lot of people now speaking the language.
Something then to ask you, because I had a guest on late last year, Bláithín de Burca, the comedian, who's a fabulous woman. If you ever get a chance, go and see Bláithín. And Bláithín is a proud gaelgeóir with a name like Bláithín de Burca, you'd imagine. And I was saying to her that, you know, for people like me growing up, LGBT, you had a language with it, and it was in English, but it didn't seem to me, just looking at the Irish language, that there was a lot of words there that you could immediately latch onto. I mean, did that come into your consciousness, or did you, you know, was your LGBT experience through Berla?
Yeah, I think a lot of it would have been through Berla, through English. But I mean, certainly, I think the Irish, you know, the dictionary has been updated so much, it's become so modernised. I mean, we see so many new books now, like Mother Folklore and Crack Baby, you know, that are really bringing the language, I suppose, into the new era. And I do think that it, you know, it does have that now. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, because I remember saying to her at the time, you know, when I looked up my Dwalra, I couldn't find a word for heroin. I was saying it was probably not a great idea to be a heroin addict in the Gaeltacht, because how would you go around and ask people?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, you came through USI. Was that a conscious decision, or and I mean, in the sense that was it a career decision, or was this the energy that was around you at the time? And as you know, as you progressed in that, you got all the way to the presidency, where you became nationally known.
I think a bit of both. I think it just, you know, I had to get over my fear of public speaking when I was in college, because that was something that was holding me back. So certainly. I think once I came out as gay, I became very involved, you know, in wanting to change the inequalities in our society. So, you know, it was the people that were around me as well. It was my network. It was, you know, my friends. It was a mixture of different things, I suppose. I never thought, you know, if you told me 10 years ago that I would have been involved in politics, that I'd be, you know, running for the Shannon, and all of that, you know, this is something that would happen to me. But life is funny, isn't it? You know, you never really know what twists and turns come along the way.
Well, if you have a sense of wonder and you pursue your dreams, I think great things can happen. Absolutely. Tell me about the LGBT scene in Cork. From the people I know down there, it's actually quite lively. Now, it's probably a bit villagey in the sense it's always Dublin compared to San Francisco and Sydney and places like that. What was your experience outside the college, or was it mainly within the college? Because they've got a good pride, they've got some good clubs and so on. Tell us about the LGBT scene in Cork.
I think the scene, you know, is a very strong one, and certainly a brilliant LGBT community in Cork. You have the Gay Project there, and you have Link, you know, you have Chambers Bar now. I mean, there used to be more bars, I think, when I was in college. As we see, you know, in Dublin, we see a lot of bars have been closed as well over the course of the last decade. So, and I think maybe that's unfortunate. I do think it's important that LGBT people have their own spaces to socialise.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there is a very lively, scene in Cork, and great support networks down there as well. A real sense of community and very accepting. So I'm very grateful for the people in Cork and the community at the time, when I came out, that supported me. I mean, you had the likes of Dave Roach, who was head of the Gay Project at the time, who passed away, unfortunately, quite recently. But I always remember, hanging out in the cafe that they had there as part of the Gay Project, and anyone was welcome there, no matter what your sexuality was or your gender, and it was certainly very nice to have a safe space to go to.
Yeah, is it mainly male centric, or do women get a fair crack of the whip there as well?
I think in general a lot of gay, LGBT clubbing can be quite male centric, and that more
certainly
men,
the bars anyway, can't they?
That more men are attending them, but there are certain spaces for lesbian and gay women as well. I certainly think things are improving as well.
And from what I hear, it's got a great pride.
Cork has a great pride. Of course it does. I mean, it's Cork, you can definitely trust them to do that, the Rebel County, so they do have a really good pride, and it's been growing from strength to strength, I think.
Let's say the last time you were in here, Senate elections were on. Coincidentally, we might have them again. You came very, very close. I mean, I think you were, of three candidates for the NUI, you came fourth. Ultimately, was that a disappointment, because it was only a handful of votes really that kept you out?
Absolutely. I mean, the last time I ran for the Shannon in 2016, I thought, if I come in the top 10, I'll be really delighted, because there was a lot of big names in the race. And I ended up being one of the most transfer-friendly candidates at the time.
You were, weren't you? Yeah.
And I did really well. So, I was very much determined after that to keep going, I suppose, within politics. And, I knew there was a lot of people out there that believed in the policies that I was putting forward around equality and inclusion.
Now, I'm not going to knock anybody who got elected at the time, but I always felt that had you had the brand recognition that the person who finished third in, it might have been a different outcome, because she was the president's daughter. Were you disappointed, or will you say, well, okay, a woman got it, so I'm relatively pleased?
Well, I certainly think that a lot of good work has been done in the last Seanad, and I think that Senator Mary Higgins in particular has done some very good work around policy and equality. But I do think that there is a need for Seanad reform, and that's something I suppose that's been promised time and time again. I know that the government has been blocking it, but I do think that we need to rally the community, and we need to put more pressure on to ensure that this happens in the future. I suppose there's been 49 years now since the referendum around extending the franchise for the university panels to all graduates of higher education institutions. So that was never enacted, and that's been 41 years. We had the Shannon referendum in 2013, which I would have campaigned in favour of keeping the Shannon, and unfortunately there's been no change since then, despite many promises from several governments. So I do think it's really, really important that in the future that it is reformed, and I think there's an urgency behind that. I think that people are getting a bit disillusioned with the Seanad. I think that they need to feel that they are a part of it, and I think the only way that we can do that is by sticking to our promises and ensuring that the franchise is opened up and everyone can feel ownership of it, because the Seanad belongs to everyone in our society. We did vote to keep it. I think the onus is on people running for election and the government and senators to make sure that it is reformed without delay.
Yep. It's interesting you say that it belongs to everybody, because we were just briefly discussing it outside, and I said I would tell you my Gareth FitzGerald story, because Gareth used to be one of my lecturers and tutors when I was studying economics and politics. And Gareth was a very honest man, in the sense that he would say things that probably people would say, oh, you shouldn't have said that, Gareth. But when he was talking to us about the Seanad, he said the Seanad in Ireland, when it was established for one reason and one reason alone, and that was to give a voice to rich Protestant farmers, because it was clear that they were not going to get a voice in the lower house. So we established this body. Now, my view has always been, as a result of that, clouded, in the sense that it was designed as a privileged chamber. I'm not seeing an enormous amount of difference between then and now. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think Laura? The Seanad should be about giving a voice to minority communities, and I think that is where it can really come into play. So be that the LGBT community, be it travellers, be it the migrant community, There's so many different minorities that I feel could be represented within the Seanad, and that senators can be a voice for them. And of course the Seanad plays a huge role in terms of legislation, in terms of checks and balances, on the Dáil. And I think that, as a senator, people can be a lot more, national. You're talking about national policies and national debates. Senators aren't tied to any one particular constituency, and I think that's the beauty of it as well, in that, they can be national representatives for everyone, and they have that, I suppose, freedom to travel around the country and engage with the wider population in that way. But I do think that the university panels, the NUI panel, the Trinity panel, I do think they're elitist.
Yeah.
I do think that the franchise needs to be extended. Absolutely, I think it's outdated, and I think people have a huge appetite for reform.
Would you go so far as to say what we should have is universal suffrage?
Absolutely, I do think so. I think that we need to find a way that works for everyone. I think that we should have universal suffrage for the Seanad. I think that every citizen should have a say. But I think there are steps, on the way to that. But certainly I do think that it needs to be opened up, not closed down. It needs to be absolutely opened up to everybody. And I do think that the nomination process for the Seanad and for the Dáil, that should close on the same day. I think you either decide you want to be a senator, or you want to be a TD or a councillor, whatever it is that you're running for. But I don't think the Seanad should be used as a consolation prize. I think it should be used as a forum for good, for change. I think, people that run for the Shannon should want to be senators, people that run for the Dáil should want to be TDs. I'm not saying that, people's careers, can't change or whatever, but I do think that it is being used as a bit of a, I suppose, consolation prize by some people, or in some cases maybe as a stepping stone as well, or a retirement home. It's been referred to as well a number of times, but I think we need to place more value on it, and I do think that means ensuring that the nomination process for the Shannon and the Dáil, the deadline for that is the same day, so people choose which one they want to run for.
Yep. About 2 years ago, I wrote an article for an international magazine, and I described the Seanad as, I was explaining it to an international audience, and I described it as, after the Catholic Church, the most undemocratic institution in Ireland, because it was so, 10% I think of the population voted for it and so on. Is that something that, I'm not saying you need to agree, but is that thinking something you could relate to?
Absolutely. I mean, I do think that it's outdated. I think that we need to ensure that more people have a say in the Shannon elections, and I think a lot of people would like to have that vote and be able to have a say on what's going on. I mean, we gave everyone, of course, everyone had a say in the referendum in 2013. All citizens had a say, so why shouldn't they have a say on the Shannon now and who gets elected?
Yeah. Something that you mentioned, and it's something that I've been championing for probably the best part of the last 10 years, and that is that instead of having these pokey little organisations, they're not going to knock, okay, you might be a member of the the Irish Cobblers Association or the Irish Land Valuers Association, but these are very unrepresentative bodies in that sense. One of the things, particularly when the gender recognition bill was going through, two things I said then is that, one, there should be an LGBT community so that people like ourselves, we can say, look, we're going to be represented there, and we can vote in that. I would give up my NUI vote to be able to register in an LGBT. How do you feel about that? Is it that we should reflect society more than just reflect history?
Well, certainly we should reflect society within politics. I mean, even if you look at gender balance, for example, only 22% of our TDs are women, so we need to reflect it in that way as well, and we do need to ensure that more minorities are elected. I mean, I think we need to review the panels as they stand, and how relevant they are to, I suppose, modern Ireland. I do think that there is, of course, some merit in having a level of expertise within the Shannon, within politics itself. I mean, some people are more expert on issues like education, some people are better at talking about things like agriculture, and I think that you do need that expertise, but that's up to the voters to decide what's important to them, and what expertise you need, I suppose, in there. I think another big problem with the Shannon is that the Taoiseach gets 11 nominees.
I think it's 15, isn't it? Or is it 11?
It's 11 nominees,
okay,
yeah. So that will require a referendum to change.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's in the Constitution, but a very quick referendum on that, I think, you could abolish that, because that's an awful lot of power to give one individual, that amount of power to place within the Seanad. And I do think, some Taoiseach have been very good in terms of making sure that those appointees are diverse and that they represent minority communities. And we've had some fantastic Taoiseach nominees serving within the Seanad. But I do think that, it isn't very democratic to give that much power to one person to nominate 11 people. So I do think they need to go, and I think that should be part of Seanad reform as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting as well that you said that, because one of the other things that Garrett said when we were talking about the Seanad was that it was designed as an expert chamber. It was designed so that you would have experienced people that were educated, even specialists in certain fields, that they could contemplate legislation and look at it in a much more detailed way and a much more non-partisan way than, say, the Dáil. Unfortunately, it hasn't really. The political process seems to have taken over. So when I was looking at the Shannon, a couple of debates, I thought to myself, God, there's some awful idiots in there, and that's all I can say. Now, I'm not going to knock one party or another, but there were people talking on subjects that they really didn't have too much knowledge about. How do you feel about that, Laura?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that don't know what they're talking about. Within the Shannon, within the Dáil, on councils, and we see this in other.
You see it all the time, don't you?
Yeah, and you see it in other countries as well. I mean, you're always going to have that. I mean, you see it in business too. You see it in other organisations. There's always some people that are more knowledgeable or better than others at getting things done, and I think maybe that's the nature of life. But at the end of the day, most of them are democratically elected, I suppose. But we do need to open up the Shannon and make it more democratic so that every citizen, I think, has a say.
Yeah, looking at, I don't want to labour too much on the panels themselves, but if you looked at particularly, say, the university panels, there's an enormous discrepancy between what it takes to get voted in Trinity and what it takes to get voted in the NUI. And then if you're in one of the ITs, or if you're in the King's Inns or anything like that, you don't even get a say at all. Do you think somehow or other that we should aggregate these so that it probably would mean that very few people from Trinity got elected, but that's a separate matter. But can we reform it piecemeal, or do we really have to a certain degree, take the house down and rebuild it from the ground up, and particularly in the education and the NU panels?
Well, I think there's, I think we can have a roadmap to universal suffrage. I mean, I do think personally that, one step, as I said, is enacting the referendum in 1979 to give all graduates a vote. That would include ITs, it would include further education colleges, it would include the likes of UL, who don't have a vote, for example.
Do UL not have a vote?
No, they don't. No, they're not part of the NUI. So, and neither do DCU, Dublin City University.
Right,
but I do think, that another step could be to merge the Trinity and the NUI panels and have one big 6-seater panel that people get to vote on. I mean, I do think that the fact that Trinity is one college and they have 3 votes, and the NUI have an equal amount, I suppose, in itself is not very.
About 5 times as well. Yeah.
It's not very representative, I suppose, but that's the system that we have, and that's for this election. But certainly, I do think that it needs to change, and I think we need to extend the franchise to make it universal, and we need to take the steps that are necessary to do that. Yeah,
that's interesting. I can hear the voice of David Norris in the background saying, I disagree with that entirely. but again, and I suppose to a certain degree that emphasises, or shall we say, reflects Garrett's point. Okay, Trinity mightn't be as Anglican as it previously was, but they would say, oh, well, we're being disenfranchised. But moving on, one of the major changes that came to the Shannon in the last, say, decade or so was the right to initiate legislation. Now, it doesn't mean that they get to enact legislation. Do you think that was a positive, or do you think that has been abused?
Yeah, no, I think that's a positive. I mean, I do think that we do need to review, I suppose, the power that senators have in terms of, legislation. And I mean, certainly they can make amendments to legislation as well. And there has been a lot of bills, I suppose, that have been put through the Shannon, that have been amended as well. And I think that's a really, really good thing. I think we've seen a lot of senators that have been very active in speaking out for the environment, for example, in terms of gender recognition as well. We've seen senators, specifically focusing in on these issues. But I do think the Shannon should be a forum for of course, legislation, but also I feel that senators should be voices within society. I think that they should be holding public meetings across the country to engage and put a spotlight on the issues that are facing minority communities in particular, those that are marginalised. And I think that that's something that we don't really see from senators. I don't see them very active in the community in terms of, it tends to be very Dublin-centric. And I do think there's a huge scope for them to be more active, in the regions, in different counties, and to kind of put a spotlight on those issues that minorities face in particular. Like, direct provision, for example. I think we could have more briefings in relation to that within the Oireachtas, hear from people that are directly affected by that and what needs to change, especially the traveller community as well. I think we need more representation for them. They need to have their own voice within the Oireachtas, and the same can be said for the migrant community, for persons with disabilities as well. So I really do think there's a lot of improvement to be made there, but putting a spotlight on those issues, I think the Shannon can serve very well.
Can I give you the Boris Johnson question? And Boris Johnson, or at least his dark cardinal in the background, has suggested moving the House of Lords to York, perhaps, or something like that. Would you favour moving the Shannon to Cork? It's an interesting one.
It is an interesting one. It's not something that I've particularly thought about. I guess that's it depends on in terms of expenses and all that, and they have their base within Dublin, and they've a new, I think, renovated
they have a lovely chamber
building chamber there. So look, I do think that they should be more active in the community and have more events outside of Dublin. I don't think there's any reason why that couldn't be looked at. But certainly I think that the main thing is that they need to not be so Dublin centric. I think that senators should be more active within the community.
We're going to have to finish up shortly, Laura, but one that I noticed it came through our letterbox because somebody in our house gets to vote in Trinity, and David Norris, top of his list was to curtail the power of the lower house to shall we say, to guillotine Shannon initiated legislation through the mechanism of money bills. Now, essentially, that says if you have a bill that has a charge against the Exchequer, you can effectively sideline it. Is that something you'd like to see?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely, I would agree with that. I think a lot of legislation has been blocked because of this. Certainly, we've seen also in terms of Seanad reform that the government have been putting a block on that, and they've been shutting that down. So I do think that we do need to look at that, that balance of power. Absolutely.
Yeah, Laura, you, as I said at the very beginning, you played an enormous role in and not always credited to the degree it might, particularly in terms of marriage equality, the Eighth Amendment, and of course in the Gender Recognition Bill, which is one of the places I came across you first. We've got a new generation of women coming through. We just hope that, as I say, that the people recognise it the way some of us have. So, Laura Harmon, it's been a delight inviting you back today, and we just wish you all the best over the next few weeks and months.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yes, that's it for this week's edition of LGBTQ Live. I'm Mick Fitz. I'll be back in a week's time or thereabouts, and in the meantime, you take care.
My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am.